Hello, Declan.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Back in the studio.
A long day.
Yes.
But we're in the studio doing a podcast, so it's all good now.
It is all good. Welcome to this episode of GUcast. We are today acknowledging really one of the cooperative trial groups that has been most impactful in my career here working in Australia for the past 15 years.
Yeah.
That's ANZUP, and we're very, very pleased to have the original chair and founder of ANZUP, Professor Ian Davis, here in the studio with us today. Ian, to have a talk about ANZUP and especially about ENZAMET. It's 10 years since the ENZAMET trial was set up, so that's going to be the theme of the podcast today, to talk a little bit about that. And thank you for coming and joining us in the studio.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be in the studios at last for GUcast.
It is, isn't it?
It's lovely to have you here, Ian, and I think it's a really important episode to do, Declan, because ANZUP, while it's a young organisation still, it has achieved so much since it started. And we're going to hear a little bit of the background from Ian.
We are, and our other guest has been very involved with the ANZUP story going back, and especially with the ENZAMET and other ENZA studies that ANZUP has been running over the years. Ian, your friend, Professor Chris Sweeney, is joining us on Zoom from Adelaide. Chris, good to see you again.
Hi, Chris.
Great to see you, Renu, Declan and Ian. And great to be on GUcast. I think this is my first time, so long-time listener, first time.
I remember we stuck a microphone in front of him somewhere before.
Yes,
maybe
at a
Lugano
meeting
or something
somewhere,
a few years ago. And
yeah, but not in studio. Not
in studio.
No.
No, next time. And of course, back in those days, you were in the US still. You were in Boston at Dana-Farber. But Chris, as I'm sure many of our audience know, is now back here in Australia. He's in Adelaide, and Chris is the director of the South Australia ImmunoGENomics Cancer Institute. And during this podcast, we're going to talk a bit about Chris's relationship with ANZUP and ENZAMET, and we're going to go back right to the start and hear about that. And so that's the idea for this themed podcast today. And this podcast is supported by our gold partners at Astellas. Astellas are one of the pharmaceutical companies who support GUcast and keep the lights on in this studio.
Absolutely. Thank you to Astellas.
Thank you to Astellas for supporting us today. So Ian, and apart from being chair of ANZUP, I didn't give you the rest of your titlage. You are a medical oncologist, professor of medicine, and you're head of the Eastern Health Medical School here, just a few kilometres out the road from us in Melbourne. So you're a practicing medical oncologist specialising in GU, and that's been your career, I suppose.
Yes, came into GU cancer before it was a thing, basically, and have really essentially subspecialised in that since then.
It's amazing, Ian, because I think I've known Ian for my entire career, since I started training.
Yes, I'm old, really.
I said that in the nicest way possible.
So nicely.
She says it about me as well. It's disappointing. I'm nearly with you, Ian. So yeah, look, in our idea, we wanted to put together this podcast to reflect the fact it's been 10 years since the ENZAMET study started. I very much remember that study starting back in 2014. And we wanted to go back to that time for you to tell us a little bit about how that study came about, and indeed ANZUP, the organisation that you founded and you chair and which ran this study, how ANZUP came into being, because I think that's a really interesting story that many of us will enjoy reflecting on, because it's one thing to look at all the success, Renew, isn't it, of these trials, and they're presenting it at ASCO and New England Journal papers, but these things don't come very easily, do they?
Well, thanks, Declan, and thanks, Renew. ANZUP has been in existence since 2008. So around about this time of year, actually. So we're now, as we speak, about 16 years old, just about ready to learn to drive a car, which is great. And it came about for a couple of reasons. At that time, in the mid-2000s, we were just starting to see systemic therapies coming through for various cancers, particularly we had doectaxel for prostate cancer a few years before, not yet available in Australia then, and then some active therapies coming through for renal cell carcinoma. And I actually had a nightmare one night thinking that with these therapies, which were pretty easy to administer, that somebody who shall remain nameless might decide that they wanted to treat metastatic cancer and it would be easy to do just by prescribing a pill. And I happened to speak to this person a few weeks after I had this nightmare, and they said, oh, yeah, no, it'll be easy. I'll just do it and my nurse will look after all the side effects.
Must have been a urologist.
I can't confirm or deny that, but I thought this is I love urologists, been working with them for a while, but I thought we do have something to offer here. So, and what we really need is an organisation that brings all of the disciplines together involved in all the different types of GU cancer. So we first set that up through COSA, the Clinical Oncology Society of Australia. We set up the Urologic Oncology Group. They thought, oh yeah, that might not be a bad idea. And suddenly people came out of the woodwork. There was intense interest in bringing people together and looking at how we were going to move into this field, which was just starting to take off with active treatments at that time. Prior to that, it really was the urologist that looked after everything. And my main contribution was pretty much palliative care before all of this. So that kicked off and was very successful. And then with initially some support from the Victorian Cancer Agency and then later from Cancer Australia, we were able to bring together the group that eventually formed ANZUP. And that came from the Australian and New Zealand germ cell trials group, which have been going for a long time, and really want to acknowledge Guy Toner, who was a huge driver behind that for so many years. And the other components we kind of cobbled together around about that time. So ANZUP was really born in 2008 and struggled for a long time to get some traction until a few opportunities started to come along, and the ENZA trials were good examples of that.
Wow.
So tell us then about the ENZA trials. So I suppose that brings us up to that era, and I remember that era, certainly the excitement of enzalutamide coming into very advanced prostate cancer, but being a well-tolerated tablet and really impressive data, and then coming a little bit more forward and so on. But what was the kind of light bulb moment or that led to ENZAMET, and I suppose ENZARAD you can update us on, but the story of ENZAMET and how it got to start in 2014, Ian.
Well, huge credit to Chris Sweeney, who's the evil mastermind behind all of this. But like all good ideas, I think, Chris, you'll confirm if this is correct, it started off over beer after a session, I think at ASCO. We were talking about where the major next advances needed to be in prostate cancer. And as you say, enzalutamide had been well established at that point in metastatic castrate-resistant disease. And Chris, you can probably chip in and talk about this, but Chris, I think, identified the opportunity to start bringing it forward, having done something similar with doectaxel in the CHARTED study.
Yeah, but what year are you talking about back then, Ian? Because this is long before CHARTED really hit the headlines. You're talking 2010, 11, or Chris can fill us in, I suppose. But Chris, do you want to pitch on in? When was that beer?
So actually, it started with a little bit of pre-baking. So as you can imagine, it takes a lot of socializing of an idea to get along. And so doectaxel hadn't read out as showing a benefit in CHARTED yet. But enzalutamide was approved for castration-resistant, and I contacted some of my contacts from the Sanofi days who were part of the doectaxel, and one of them, a fellow who we should give a lot of credit to help get this across the line, was a fellow called Majid Tabesh, who sent out an email saying, "Hey guys, I'm now at Astellas Global," and I replied saying, "How about a study with the metastatic hormone-sensitive with hormone-sensitive prostate cancer?" He said to me, "Let me find my office first." And then, so we sat down and had a chat and just thought through what this could look like. The GTUG-15 study with doectaxel read out as negative, and I was there going, well, where's this going to go for doectaxel with the CHARTED study? Fortunately, I'd realised that there was some slight differences, and so I had a little bit of enthusiasm that the poorer prognosis it may play out. But having said that, and having built a relationship with colleagues within the industry, in this case, Majid, we sat down, mapped it out, and then brought it. And he said, "Look, Chris, I can run this as an IST with you, but for the way things are structured, it's got to be outside of Australia, outside of the United States." And I said, "Well, I'll put away my US passport. Can't go with the cooperative groups because of that, because it's got to be ex-US." And he called Ian up and said, "Ian, by the way, what would you like to do? Would you like to do a study of metastatic hormone sensitive and possibly an adjuvant study?" And he said, literally, "I know some urologists, and I'll give my right kidney to actually get these going."
Wow.
And so then the reason why I put faith in ANZUP is because I knew it was tied in with the Clinical Trials Centre at the University of Sydney, and they could run global studies. And I said, I know the goodwill of Marg and Ian, and the very fact that there is a possibility that this team of Ian and Marg and the University of Sydney team could pull together an amazing coalition of people. And that's where this conversation started. We got together a number of key people from around the world. And I'll hand it over to Ian and just think through the people that he and Marg brought together to make this happen. Some of my contacts at Cancer Trials Ireland with Ray McDermott and some people from Canada. But Ian, how did you get buy-in for this crazy idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was a crazy idea. It was impossible, wasn't it, Chris? But we didn't know it was impossible, so we did it anyway. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. But truly, we were very naive, or I certainly was, about all of this. Fortunately, I was surrounded by people who are a lot smarter than me, which is not a difficult bar to jump over. So the way things unfolded were quite interesting. We'd been knocking this idea around for a little while, and as Chris said, we had some positive noises coming from Majid through at Astellas. So we thought this might not be a bad idea to talk about. So I remember it vividly. On August the 9th, 2013, we had a meeting in Melbourne where we sat down with the Astellas people and literally put a half-page concept in front of them and said, this is what we'd like to do. And at the end of that discussion, they gave us the go-ahead. Said, let's get going. We can do this. Terrific. Said, but one condition. You need to get one patient on ENZAMET and also ENZARAD, which we pitched to them at the same time, before the 31st of March. I said, that's great. What year exactly? I said, 2014. So it's August to March, 7 months from half a paragraph. So somehow, with enormous input from a huge range of people in Australia, New Zealand, around the world, and I'll name some of these in a moment, we managed to pull together the protocol, the participant information and consent forms, the ethics applications. We managed to go out to feasibility, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but in various regions around the world, get all of that information back, put the package together, submit it to ethics, have it bounce back, because it always does, resubmit it, have the activation meetings at the different sites, identify patients, and
Get someone on.
we literally got one patient on each study on the 31st of March 2014, which was an amazing achievement. But before I forget, I do want to acknowledge some of the key people in all of this. So ANZUP is the lead group for ENZAMET and also for ENZARAD. It's sponsored by the University of Sydney, and as Chris said, the NHMRC Clinical Trials Centre there coordinated the study globally and have done a fantastic job with that. We worked very closely with Cancer Trials Ireland, and they brought in Ireland and the UK. We worked with the Canadian Cancer Trials Group, and Chris was still at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute then, and we managed to get sites through there as well. So together with Australia and New Zealand. So this was an untested, untried coalition. None of these people had ever come together in this way before. We'd never done a trial like this, certainly not of this scale, where we're planning 1,100 patients to be recruited for a study where we're looking at overall survival as the primary endpoint. And then as we were trying to design a study, we thought we haven't made this difficult enough for ourselves. We need to make sure that we've got an active control group. We didn't want to compare against nothing. It was an open label study, so we couldn't use placebo. We didn't want to have a positive study and then people just say, well, it's 2 treatments versus ADT alone. Of course it was positive. So we included an active control group. And we managed to get that kicked off. And of course, it recruited initially most rapidly in Australia and then New Zealand. The other sites were very enthusiastic, but it took longer for them to get going. But they eventually contributed enormously to the study. And of course, Astellas was contributing a study drug and contributing all of the resources for the conduct of the study, but were very hands-off. They recognised that this was an academic study. ANZUP and the University of Sydney were in control of it, and that's remained that way ever since, up until the results came out. So eventually the site started to come on board. And then at ASCO in 2014, so we've been going for about 3 months at that point, something interesting happened, didn't it, Chris? I think you were up on the podium at that point.
Yeah, so we had the good fortune of actually the chartered study reading out, and we created a few interesting findings, namely that we could break groups out by different risk groups. Now, the high volume and low volume item we discovered, reported on, didn't discover, it was always there, but we just reported on its outcome by whether the patients had doectaxel or not, and whether they presented by relapse after a prostatectomy or radiation or de novo metastatic disease. So it being a cooperative group, we actually were able to be a lot broader in our inclusion criteria for chartered, and we took a lot of those learnings from chartered to ENZAMET. So we've had the opportunity of having many years of pre-knowledge of how to run a trial in this setting, guide how to put a study together for ENZAMET. And the interesting thing came up, well, what is the standard of care? And within the ANZUP community and the broader ENZAMET collaborative in Ireland, Canada, USA, New Zealand and Australia, obviously, we all thought that some patients do benefit from doectaxel upfront, and it would actually not be in the patient's best interest if we decline some patients' ADT and doectaxel. So we actually ended up allowing a stratification for doectaxel use to ensure patients who ended up on the control arm got the optimal therapy for them. But that also gave us the ability to actually have a broader group of patients to see who got doectaxel per physician choice and patient ability to tolerate it. And also it gave us the opportunity to see which groups potentially benefited from adding enzalutamide across the risk groups and across whether they got an ADT backbone or an ADT doectaxel backbone. And so we all sat down and said, we've got to do this. This is the right thing for our patients, is to actually make sure we have a standard of care that's right for them. And not one standard of care is right for every patient. So we, as a collaborative group of clinicians who weren't bound by bureaucracy and regulatory red tape, actually got down and said, let's design this the way we think patients need to be treated. And we actually had patient engagement along the way, and they agreed. And so we amended the study as quickly as we could. So although it's not a ADT doectaxel plus or minus enzalutamide or ADT plus or minus enzalutamide, it's a broader church of patients and data that we can now mine to actually work out what is the right treatment for the right patient. It took a long while for people to think through and realize, I think, that there are different prognostic groups within the metastatic hormone-sensitive patient population. And it's, I think, quite logical to think that different patients would benefit from different treatments. And we, within ENZAMET, were able to be on the front foot of that and actually create a more real-world experience of potential control arms and then treat investigational treatments on top of that. Ian, how would you add to that, do you think?
Yeah, I'm very proud of that, and I feel pretty strongly about this actually as well. So we realised that by having an active control and then by allowing people to have doectaxel, which we knew in mid-2014 was the best available treatment, we knew that might actually compromise our ability to see a positive result, because the control arm outcomes are going to be better than using suboptimal treatment. But it was important that we offer the best possible treatment to our patients. Also, the ENZAMET was a little bit more eclectic in its patient population compared to some of the other studies. So we have much more of a mix of prognostic groups. We've got some patients who are always destined to do well, some who are in the group that might perhaps be predicted to do less well, rather than a more uniform group that might be more positive, but where the results might be more relevant just to one patient population. So I'm very proud of the fact that we stuck to our guns. There was resistance to this idea, but as Chris alluded, not from the investigators. We saw where the clinical need was, and I'm very, very strongly of the opinion that we have to have the right control groups for these studies. Otherwise, we're not doing the best that we can for our patients. I think that's why having a cooperative group running a study like this is a really good model, because we can make sure that sort of thing happens.
And you can be nimble, can't you? You can make those changes, yeah.
Yeah, can I just add to that? As time panned out, if you actually look at the treatments and the actual outcome of the patients on ENZAMET, you can just see by accruing a study in UK, Ireland, Australia, Canada, America, New Zealand, the use of therapies for castration-resistant disease is quite pronounced. And for whatever reason, the ADT doectaxel and the synchronous high volume is more than 60 months with the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. 60 months where we've got good access to therapy for CRPC, good access to good supportive care during therapy. And it's the only study that actually has high-income countries that only accrue to the study. And we have this survival in the worst prognostic group with ADT doectaxel, that's 60 months, whereas every other study, including Chartered, it's 49 months or less. So we actually also have a data set that's actually probably more representative of the patients that we see in the countries that were accrued, whereas a lot of the industry studies have studies from patients from Eastern Europe where they have much less therapy for castration-resistant disease, for example. So it's actually, in a way, we were destined to possibly not have a positive study because we had the most upfront therapy followed by therapy for progression than the other studies. And still, all the subgroups still have a survival benefit of adding enzalutamide to it. And the other thing I think we have is the ability to really dig into the side effect profile. We didn't go asking, can we show that there wasn't a difference? We said, we know there's a difference in the side effect profile with enzalutamide, and it's the same with all the other drugs. And we went to find how much of a side effect benefit, side effect detriment there is in the quality of life domains. And if you look at the details with the publication by Martin Stockler and JCO, looking at the enzalutamide incremental impact on side effects, and you compare that with the enzalutamide side effects reported in Archer's study, the same drug, same patient population, you can see how much effort we went in to quantify the side effects. And it's clear there are some patients who do have a side effect profile that led to a dose reduction, but it didn't compromise the overall survival of those patients. They had a dose reduction and they still had the survival benefit from it. So what I would also spruik about the cooperative groups is that we have the energy and the ability to dig deeper into the data and get more information that we can actually share with the treating and patient community. And to that, I'll hand over to Ian to talk about the opportunities we have and are just starting to brew from the cooperative group studies.
We've never spoken so little on the podcast. I'm here with my mouth open, enjoying every moment of it.
To listen to this. But yes, Ian.
Well, the story continues. So recruitment kicked off. And for people who are wondering, this is a study of metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer.
We should make that clear.
People starting treatment with androgen deprivation therapy, with or without docetaxel, comparing enzalutamide to a standard non-steroidal anti-androgen, and looking to see if there was a survival benefit. So we're simple people, simple questions, but there's a lot of extra complexity there. So eventually got up to momentum, and at one point we were recruiting more than 50 people a month around the world, and numbers were ticking over really well, and finally reached our target, had 1,125 people recruited. Then in 2019, we heard the results of the Latitude and Stampede arms looking at the benefits of abiraterone in the same patient population, showing clear benefit. And at that point, we had planned an interim analysis after 67% of the 470 deaths that we'd planned for in the statistical plan. We thought maybe we should bring that forward because 67% was going to be a little way down the track. Let's look at 50% because we saw such a benefit with abiraterone. Maybe we'll see a bigger benefit than we anticipated with enzalutamide. And so that happened with a data lock in February 2019, and the results, as history will say, were positive. So we then managed to get a late-breaking abstract for ASCO, which was then accepted as an oral and then plenary presentation. And we're trying to then get synchronous publication in the New England Journal. 3 months from the initial contact to the New England Journal to the eventual publication was also quite a task. Again, we didn't know that was impossible, but we did that. At ASCO 2019, Chris was on the stage presenting the interim data showing substantial benefit for enzalutamide at that first interim analysis. And at that point, we were not yet clear whether what the role the docetaxel was playing. And we're also aware that the people who had died up until that point were obviously the ones who had the most aggressive disease. So it might not be representative of the entire population. So we still wanted to follow up to the full 470 events. And thankfully, Astellas agreed and have continued to provide that funding support. So that was published then. And then in 2022, we eventually hit that 470 event milestone and presented that information again at an oral presentation at ASCO, showing that not only had the benefit been maintained, but it was preserved. And we had some extra information then. So we had much longer follow-up, 68 months median follow-up, showing that the survival benefit was maintained right across the board. It didn't matter what subgroup you were in, there was a benefit from adding enzalutamide, whether you had metachronous or synchronous presentation, high or low volume disease, docetaxel or not, there was a benefit from enzalutamide to a greater or lesser extent, depending on which group you might be in. We'd had the quality of life data published by then as well. We did some exploratory analyses about the subgroups to try to see what we could learn from all of that. But it then became very clear that this was a useful treatment. There was a lot of interest in triplet therapies at that point, and obviously Arasense came out, and subsequently PEACE-1 came out with data in a similar sort of setting. And the field seemed to move towards this idea that triplet therapy should really be the default, ADC plus an AR pathway inhibitor plus docetaxel. And I think what we're shown in ENZAMET is that is not necessarily the case. In fact, I would say it might be the exception. We've shown that we don't do any disservice to our patients by giving them doublet ADC and enzalutamide with or without docetaxel. And that means that we give them less toxicity than they would get with triplet therapy. We reserve docetaxel for later treatment. But we still don't really know how best to use this. We make these decisions based on clinical parameters, and I think we can do better than that. So behind the scenes, we've got an enormous suite of translational work that's going on as we speak. And we're starting to see some of those results come through now. We're hoping that will help build on existing information from Chris and Anis Hamid and other people who've looked at the genomic signatures in the tissue, circulating tumour DNA signals, a whole range of other measures that we are looking at through our translational work, which we hope will eventually tell us who needs this intensification, who needs more, who should have triplet therapy, and maybe even the other side, who doesn't need to have that much, who might do well perhaps even with ADC alone. And we're hoping that we'll learn some of those lessons as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were just saying at ESMO this year, Declan, ENZAMET is the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. And we saw Anis with his poster and Lisa Horvath, and some of the biomarker and translational work from this is just fascinating.
Yeah, we're really excited to see those results start to come through.
And do you think that the cooperative trial group, the IST trial like ENZAMET, does a bit more of that than the classic pivotal registration study? There's a bit more enthusiasm from the clinician researchers to embed more of this sort of enriched science work, because in ENZAMET, coming again out of a humble start, I think is what the audience will hear from this, to have now this rich tapestry of information still coming 10 years later and will be coming for years more to come. Is this one of the features of a really well-run cooperative trial group?
Well, I'd like to think so. And yeah, we've had incredible buy-in by people. People are so generous with their time and their wisdom and their expertise and everything that's been required to keep a study like this going and so successful has happened really because people have donated all of that to us. So I think people have taken some personal pride in this project, and this is something that we have developed and grown ourselves and now seeing through to fruition. And as you say, there's a whole lot more yet to come. There's health economic analyses. We're going to have further follow-up of the quality of life data. We just need to make the case that we're doing the right thing for people. That's really our driving imperative behind all of this.
Chris, can I ask, when you're planning such a large-scale trial, one that you hope will be practice-changing, I mean, the issue with prostate cancer is it's such a rapidly evolving field that, inevitably disruptors will come in and shake things up. And one of the disruptors we know and love is PSMA PET CT. So when that sort of came about, how did you deal with those sorts of obstacles when you were recruiting for ENZAMET?
Actually, can I jump in there and tell a story? Because I remember this time, Renew. It was 2014, so when the trial was only up for a few months, Chris had just read out the first shockwave of Charted that made you nimbly have to look at your protocol. But PSMA PET CT, we did our first scans in August 2014, and then it just went crazy. We never stopped doing them. And I remember being in the clinic one day at Peter Mac, late 2014, and Guy Toner, your colleague who you mentioned earlier, who was one of the original founders, I suppose, of ANZUP. I walked across to his room to say, I've got a patient for ENZAMET, but he's only got metastases on one of these new PSMA PET CTs that we were all just getting used to. And I said, but look, he's got these extensive, skeletal metastases, and he hasn't had any other imaging. What do you think? He said, we're not sure what to do. We better let's ring Ian and find him. So I remember being there one Tuesday afternoon in the old Peter Mac building, and we rang you to find out. And I remember saying, no, we can't, we don't know what to do with that. We this may come and go. We all didn't know what to do with it.
And I didn't know either, but I was very confident about that.
I remember us being impressed with how confident you were about that. But sorry to cut across, but I recall it. And I recall our enthusiasm as urologists recruiting into this study back then, because ANZUP was very welcoming to urologists. We enjoyed going to their meetings and their master classes, but this was our population. This is newly diagnosed metastatic patients. So this was exactly our patient population. So it was important that we were interested. So we were very keen because we had experience with enzalutamide in the CRPC setting, and it looked like a great drug to give to patients. So clearly urologists like us were very enthusiastic to bring it forward. But I remember those two shockwaves in 2014. Chris had charted, and everyone had to nimbly, and of course it really boosted everything about the ENZAMET study. And PSMA PET, that shockwave kind of never went away then. So you had to deal with that, I presume. We'll hand back to Chris, but and I think eventually it was you had to have correlative imaging, or you had to have a biopsy-proven thing if it was only on PET. I can't remember. We've all got used to it in the subsequent years, but this was a very early thing for ENZAMET because it was 2014 in Australia, and PET scanning was already booming everywhere.
So I think the answer is that the open-mindedness to say, yes, this is coming, and not be afraid of it, but embrace it. Say, yep, you can get PSMA PET CT, but we've got to stick by the protocol. But let's actually make sure we can get those scans and then see what on a PSMA PET CT is telling us versus just a standard CAT scan and a bone scan, and how can we look at the biology and the difference of it. So I think the key thing about our group, I'll go back to one thing, is the inclusiveness of a broad group of researchers and a broad group of investigators. If you just look at the author lists of the people on the abstracts and the publications, it's not just a couple of people. It's a broad group of people. And the PSA native publication was Ronna from Ireland, who's now Peter Mac. And so not Peter Mac, Princess Margaret. So I think what I'm getting to in a roundabout way is the inclusiveness and bringing together many people's different thoughts. So were we afraid of PSMA PET CT? I don't think so. I think we saw it as an option, as an opportunity. And for example, we now have 80 of the patients who were on ENZAMET, and we're going to correlate what on PSMA PET CT is associated with high volume disease by CT and bone scan. There is no doubt that we get more information from PSMA PET CT. Fantastic. We also get one scan and we get the complete story. So the notion of how can we actually make use of the PSMA PET CT to better choose which patients need which therapy versus not, who can benefit from the SBRT, who needs doectaxel, in addition to all the biology of the patients who are enrolled on these studies. The genomic profiling of their primary tumors and now the PSMA PET CT imaging. It's a wealth of data, and I think it speaks to the inclusiveness and the broad-mindedness. Urologists, medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, health economists, nurses, patient advocates, imaging for nuclear medicine, the radiologists. And that's what a cooperative group study allows. And it brings in a broader group that we get broader information and we can go forward. And it's been a complete honor to actually have worked with this amazing crew who just wants to get on and do the right thing.
Well said.
Bravo. Isn't
Very
that
nice.
fantastic?
Yeah.
I just love it. There seems like a family feel to it, Ian, as well. But it always feels like that. We love going to ANZUP.
Yeah.
And by the way, for audience out there, ANZUP, you can Google them. Welcomes members. It's a free membership organisation. All of our urology trainees and indeed our visitors who come and spend a few months with us sign up to ANZUP and enjoy being part of it. But do you want to say anything about that, Ian?
Absolutely right, Declan. We really want to be as inclusive as possible. So it is the only group that we have in Australia across all disciplines, all GU cancer types, and we really celebrate that. And as Chris alluded, we want to find opportunities for people to take leadership roles in the organisation for future studies, for sub-studies of trials like ENZAMET. We want to hand that around. It's not the Ian and Chris show. It's meant to be inclusive and to give opportunities for people. So we really hope that people will look at the organisation, come along and join. Membership is free. We'll give you a 50% discount, quite generously. And the annual scientific meetings are a fantastic event. I just love going to that.
And it's not just the ASMs. And the ASMs have now harnessed a lot of worldwide attention. It attracts some very good, leaders from around the world. But, the workshops that you run and the masterclasses that you run, the ideas generation workshops, the grants, it's sort of like the one-stop shop for anyone who has an idea or is interested in getting involved in research. Yeah, and thank you to so many people who contribute so generously to make that happen. It's
and
amazing.
If you didn't have the big players like Astellas, who took a punt probably back then, you'd agree, Ian, and Bayer since then with the DAZZLE studies and so on. So we do need industry support for these cooperative trial groups and ISTs. And I think this ENZAMET story that we've enjoyed listening to today is just a great example of how rich that reward can be for everyone who's been involved in this journey. I think also, when all these new trials read out with, the RPs, NMC-RPC and mHSPC, we forget that ENZAMET started so long ago and gave us such important information. And, they were crazy ideas that were way ahead of their time.
And crazy is what we do best. But there's more to come. Watch this.
More
space.
crazy to come. And look, that's what we wanted to finish on, Ian and Chris. Here we are in the second half of 2024. Are there things we can look forward to next year coming out of? Well, ENZAMET is really what we wanted to focus on today. So, what are you excited about? Stuff that we'll be breaking cover next year.
Well, we haven't talked about ENZARAD, which was also launched on that same day back in 2014. So ENZARAD is looking at patients with high risk prostate cancer receiving ADT and radiation therapy, and the question is, do we add enzalutamide versus a non-steroidal, and do we see what was initially planned to be a survival benefit? That was going to be a long time coming to that endpoint. So based on some work that Chris has led through the IceCap consortium, the primary endpoint of that study has been changed to metastasis-free survival, which we know is a great surrogate for overall survival. And we're hoping that, in one sense, that will read out sometime probably late this year or early next year, in 2025. I say kind of hoping because in order for that to happen, bad things have to happen to some really kind and generous people who are participating in the study. So we don't want that to happen. The longer that they stay well, the better. But the way things are tracking, it looks like we'll probably reach our events either late 2024, early 2025. Hopefully something we'll be able to report in 2025.
Well, that'll be very exciting. And Chris, anything else from you to look forward to coming out of this treasure trove?
One thing, the other group that I didn't mention is that the broad church of people, but there are key people within the pharmaceutical industry companies that have been integral to this, from the medical many advocates from within. And so the other thing to just realize is that a very open conversation, we may disagree on a few points, but at the end of the day, we all agree on the one thing. Let's get these improved medicines into the patients and work out how to use them best. There may be some slight disagreements around the edges, but the core mission of everyone is the same. And hopefully we'll see, as Ian said, benefits in both enzalutamide and the collaboration with the Astellas, which was Astellas and Medivation, now Pfizer. But with Dazzle, as you said, the darolutamide and the high-risk localized disease, the people who actually put their faith in us, we are desperate to return the goodwill on that faith. But we want to appreciate people who did, as you say, took a punt on us along the way.
Love it.
Well, Ian and Chris, you guys both tell a very good story. That was very cool.
It really was. And well done to everyone who's been involved. And Ian did call them out earlier on, and we'll add some of that into the show notes and some links as well. And links back to our ANZUP podcast. We really enjoyed
the highlights.
We post podcasts from the ANZUP meeting because it's such a cracking meeting always. So Ian and Chris, congratulations again. Thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to the wonderful gift that is ENZAMET, and long may it keep on giving.
Thank you so much. It's been great.